And so as these justifications began to break down because I wasn't getting what I wanted out of life, there was this internal tension created between what I sought and what I had in my reality. And so through this process of self-examination and sitting in silence, I began to unwind my own bullshit. So I began the process of calling myself out. Like, you're not as great as you think you are. There are a lot of flaws. So I began to attack my character flaws and defects rather than just focus on the things that I was good at. And so, this began a real process of self-humiliation, I call it, of actually starting to work on your weaknesses as opposed to showing your strengths out in the public view to other people to make me feel good. And, one of the things I had is I would surround myself with people that were not as good as me. So my friends, their relationships that I could control very well because, I was more skillful, I was better looking. There was a whole set of parameters that I had in my life. And I didn't do this consciously, it just happened that way. So I shied away from people that would challenge me as a man or challenge me to grow in areas of my life. And, as I began getting frustrated and dissatisfied with where I was in my life, financially, emotionally, and spiritually, I began to, seek out beyond my comfort zone and push into areas that made me feel uncomfortable. And, we fast forward, I meet Bill Kirkland about a little over a year ago, and at this point, both my parents had died, I had gone bankrupt, I had started my own life where I started my own businesses, I made choices that are no longer going to work for other people, so I got to a point where I was already well on my way to living reality based on the truth, a reflection of my higher self or God, and less so based in the art of delusion. Now, the ego is all-powerful that is omniscient, and early on I would underestimate the power of the ego, and so I would feel good and make progress, and all of a sudden stuff would fall apart, and then I realized, my ego took over and took control. And then I would have to find out, what is going on here with this ego thing, and begin to stretch beyond my own paradigms and belief systems. And so it was gradually opening up my world to contain a more expansive view of reality. And it was constantly, when I hit these roadblocks, I call these paths of resistance literally a paradigm a block. So I've reached the limits of my boundaries, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And now I had to figure out, how do I go beyond that? That's not a mental, it's not an intellectual process. That's an emotional surrender process, I found. And so it's surrendering to something deeper in myself and learning to trust more and learning to act on my little intuitive promptings, which were often contradictory to what I was doing. So often pattern breakers would force me to do things in opposition to what I felt was right. Because my limits are a function of what I believe to be true. And if I want to break a pattern, sometimes I have to go against my primary belief systems in order to get myself beyond my own limits. And so enter Bill Kirkland with the bioresonance program. Now my energy fields are flooded with all this stuff. And I feel good initially. I'm like, wow, what's this all about? This is so cool. And I start feeling really good. It's like being on a constant state of ecstasy. I don't have these negative thoughts when I wake up. I'm not dragging myself to get out of bed. All of a sudden I'm getting really productive. I'm moving forward very fast. And then over time, I'm gaining more control of my reality. Things are happening sort of spontaneously. Things that I used to hit these brick walls, I was now blowing through them. And I didn't really understand the process. Until probably about 6 to 8 months later, did I start seeing like these deeper resistances start to come up. So it was in a lot of ways a lot of the old stuff that was blocking me was coming back. Yet at the same time, my life was much more functional. People liked me better, I had far healthier relationships. So all of the external world was completely working out. But the internal feelings started coming back a little bit. Yet, if I continued to look at the feelings, dive into the darkness, the machines would clear the fields out, and then I continue to make progress. So it's the tools of self-examination, the tools of sitting in silence, coupled with the bioresonance machines, enables you to leapfrog these barriers and resistances fairly well. And one of the things I've learned recently, or I've known, but I've now started to apply, when you hit a block or you have an appearance of a failure in life, you get rejected, you don't get the job, you don't get the girl, I found that there's always something very positive tied right next to the negative outcome. And so if you stay on alert and you stay open and you allow yourself to let go and process the trauma, that there is an opportunity that was better than the perceived failure that you just went through. And so success is a function of a series of failures as far as I'm concerned. And it's the internal strength that the program provides through the constant flooding of your fields that forces you to see your own belief systems. And then eventually you have to let go of these belief systems and move through it. Now, if you've never actually self-examined your life, you're going to eventually reach a point where you're going to have a lot of difficulty, especially if you're like, oh, I feel good, I need to jump to the next machine, I need to do this. And you're pushing so fast, you don't realize that eventually there are going to be things inside yourself that you're going to have to confront. And so if you don't have the tools to look at these things properly and to understand what they mean, that this negativity coming up deep within the welling with your subconscious is a function of your clearing and your spiritual progress and your emotional progress. If you understand that, then you can see it for what it is, accept it, and move on. It doesn't have to be a long, drawn-out process. I know in the past sometimes it would take me years and months to overcome certain hurdles and barriers. And I would be welling in depression for 6-9 months and lethargy and not being able to move and do anything. Since I've been on the bioresonance program, that has never happened. What I define as a depression may be 48 hours or a week at the most. Yet at the same time, I'm fully functional. I'm able to run businesses. I'm able to act as if things are okay on the outside. And inevitably, I gain the insight into the problem, and then I just move through it. So that's kind of been the pattern on the bioresonance program. Now, I see some other people that come up these hurdles, and they don't know what's going on, and there's a couple of things they do. They quit and they run away, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I found that some people drop out of the program. They stabilize at a certain level, and their lives are somewhat functioning. It all depends on what, coming in, what do you want out of this program? Are you seeking total liberation, total submission to the ego, or are you seeking just to, be financially prosperous? Are you seeking just to have a nice relationship and a marriage? I mean, if those are your goals, that's fine. So you may not want to push yourself that fast, that quickly. Because if you take the really hard path and the straight and narrow path, there's going to be some stuff come up down the road that you're going to have to deal with. Because these are the blocks that prevent us from contact with our higher selves. These are, I call it the internal intuition guidance system. The system, as you remove the negativity, becomes more clear, and the negativity to me is just the ego. The ego is just all the negativity. And as the ego begins to be broken down and then the negativity is cleared, the ego begins to shrink in size and become less of an influence. I think that's all I have to say. Thanks.
Kevin, I can kind of relate to what you're saying. Mine kind of went in a different way, and if you don't mind, folks, I'll chronicle that as well. For me, my life was, I would say, for the first 22 years, pleasing my father. So I went through and got my degree, and I was a degree in chemistry, which was quite difficult. And then I was going to be a forensic chemist with the FBI and was hired, then got drafted. I was a military intelligence special agent, decided I didn't want to work in the FBI. After 2.5 years in Washington and